And we are live. Welcome everybody to another installment of Coffee Chat on our Where in the World program. We've gone to Guatemala today and I have lots of guests. We're not just going to talk to one person. We have four people here that have a connection to Guatemala. So there's William Rosenden. Good morning, William.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Right, and then we have a tandem here. We've got a team of Steve and Maria Smith. Steve is coming to us from Washington, and I think you are too, right, Maria?
Yes.
That's right.
All right, good morning to both of you then.
We'd rather be in Guatemala, but we're coming to you from Washington.
Yeah, I think that's a sentiment shared by all on the screen today. And then my daughter Maia Cohen from Fort Collins, Colorado. Good morning, Maia.
Hi there.
I've gathered this group of people because we did a tour of Guatemala together at the end of 2019, just before the COVID crisis hit. We had an exceptional experience. For those of you who tuned in on Monday, you met Diego, who was instrumental in setting us up for that tour. We all had an exceptional experience. And so I'm hoping today we can do a little bit more of a deep dive into the experiences that we had there, because that, in my opinion, is what really drove that tour. Before we dive right in, I want to mention that next week we're doing Japan and Where in the World, and that's going to be a really great week. I've been working with people in Japan, so we've got a number of things set up. No specifics to talk about, but if you're interested in Japan, you might want to tune in next week. I'll try to keep an eye on the Facebook feed to see if any of our viewers have any comments or questions that they'd like to throw out, and we certainly welcome that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and talk about Guatemala. And Maria, I'm going to start with you because you are the one genuine Guatemalan in our midst. And I would just ask you to give us your nickel-sized assessment of Guatemala as a destination. Why should people want to go to Guatemala?
Okay. I think people should go to Guatemala because it's a hidden destination with a lot of, so it's a third world country. And a lot of people hear that and they don't want to go because they think it is dangerous, or there's a lot of safety concerns that people have. But I really encourage people to think aside that and realize that there are people there who are living their life just as we are here. There's a lot of differences, of course, but there's a lot to learn from Guatemala. And I think that it is an amazing learning experience. Obviously, beautiful sceneries like the one behind you. And I think people, if they're looking for a good experience to meet new people, and if they have a care for other people in the world, they should go and visit Guatemala.
Excellent. William, I want to go to you next just because we might lose you at any moment. I didn't mention that. William is playing a grandfather babysitter today, and at any moment he might have to flee. So William, yeah, what's your overall take on Guatemala, your experience, and why people should visit there?
Well, it was my first time to Guatemala with Imprint when I traveled with all of you there. And it is a sight to behold. The colors, the people, the food, and the welcoming nature of the Guatemalan people was something that really touched me deeply. It was a very special trip. That particular location that we're looking at in your background, of course, is like kind of a super extra surprise when we arrived at that spot to stay there for a few days. Staying in a place like that with Imprint kind of takes the edge off a little bit. We're 1 minute we're climbing the side of a volcano, sitting in the middle of coffee fields in the dirt, and then the next moment we're swimming in that pool behind you. So there's a lot of contrast in Guatemala. You see a lot of people who are living in the margins and just trying to make a daily wage so they can feed their families. And then you have beautiful places like that behind you. It's all super special. People are so welcoming. I would say the only thing that was a little bit crazy were the roads, getting between Guatemala City and the lake. But it was lovely. The animals, all kinds of beautiful birds. We saw beautiful butterflies. We saw monkeys. The markets are really a sight to behold. It's a perfect spot for a photographer. If you're into photography, Guatemala is the place to go. I felt really comfortable, very, very safe. And I'm super excited to get back there. I can't wait.
All right. So Maya, I know that Guatemala made quite an impression on you, and I know you recently blogged about it. Share with our viewers your take on that experience you had.
Yeah, I was particularly moved, I think, by Guatemala. And, frankly, that's not always easy when we go to so many destinations that have similar things going on. But I think for me, the impact came from the contrast, kind of like William was saying, where there are people in deep poverty right next to people buying $20 martinis in the skyrise buildings. And I don't know, it really touched me also because I didn't know very much about Guatemala when I went there. And I learned so much about the country and its history, and particularly the US's involvement in its history. And so I personally feel as an American, we have a responsibility to go and visit and learn about our participation in what is going on there and what has happened there, and going forward, just learning. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think it's just really important to go and understand what we participated in and do what we can to help.
We'll circle back to talk a little bit about that history here in a minute, but I want to go to Steve now, and I'm deliberately bringing in Steve last because he was the orchestrator of this experience that we all had. He was the force behind the tour and partnered with me in setting it up, which means I sat back and let Steve do all the work, which he did beautifully and got us set up there. So Steve, just wrap this up a little bit, just in our. And by that, I just mean this overall impression of Guatemala. You've been involved there for many, many years. Tell us a little bit about that. And then we'll start talking about some of the experiences that we had.
Well, I like what everybody said, from Maria to Maya to William, about the different reasons to go. To boil it down, it is a remarkably scenic country. I think there's 32 volcanoes in the size of a county in the United States. The lakes, like the one behind you at Titlan, the scenery is remarkable. The people are gentle. They're welcoming. They're like my daughter Maria. You'll get a sense of that. They are lovely people who will talk to you. If you can get past the language barrier, which is generally easy to do, without judgment. And I think for Americans to travel to a place where our government, our country has had such a huge impact historically, and not necessarily positive, though today the American impact is hugely positive because there's so much relief work going on and so much church-related and other voluntary organizations like the one that Maria was involved with, Global Visionaries, that is helping the country. It's for an American to travel to Latin America, to see Guatemala, you get a little bit of everything that way. You get your fingernails dirty in understanding real world problems and maybe solutions that would apply to many other parts of the world. It's a good classroom, I think, then, Reed, for that kind of travel. And it's you're not going somewhere dusty and dirty and ugly. It's a beautiful place to have those lessons explained to you.
Excellent. We've nibbled around the edges of this history. Let's talk a little bit about that. I'll try to summarize it, and then you guys can jump in and correct me where I've got my facts wrong. But, the United Fruit Company, which was an American fruit company, went in and bought up huge swaths of Guatemalan territory. They had a very, very favorable arrangement there with the government. But it was unbalanced and unfair to the local farmers there. And then was it the 40s or the 50s that there was a coup, and a new government came in that wanted to redistribute to the land to the local people. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. There was a new government that came in and enacted those changes, which led to a coup, which was backed by the CIA, unless somebody can correct me there, backed by the CIA, basically because the United Fruit Company's financial interests, economic interests were being diluted by the fact that they were losing their lands, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure I got some of the facts wrong, but that led to a civil war in Guatemala. And so when we talk about how somewhat surprising it is to be well treated by the Guatemalans, to be welcomed, there's that history involved, and they're pretty much aware of the United States involvement in that. So that's what we're talking about. William, you made the comment that it's really important to understand that. Do you have any more to chime in on this subject? Correct me where I was wrong, or?
No, but I will say that having, I was in college at the time that was all happening, and being aware of it, but really not understanding it. And that was the thing about being on this trip. As every trip that we go on, you learn so much. I was learning things. I was frankly quite almost embarrassed by the fact that I didn't know most of that history. Again, being 18, 19 years old when that was occurring in Guatemala, essentially in our backyard. I had a friend that was in Nicaragua at the time sending letters, and I would receive in about 84, 85, 86, I was receiving newsletters from her explaining the situation, but it really hit home and, sunk in during that visit. I was very, very grateful for that experience. And now I feel like there's so much more that I need to learn about it, and it's, I think sometimes as Americans, we kind of put our head in the sand and we don't really want to think about the impact that our country has on our neighbors to the south, Mexico and countries in Central America and in South America. So super grateful for that opportunity.
Maya, I know that part of the tour had a big impact on you. You want to chime in here?
Yeah. I just found that I was incredibly frustrated that I had never even heard of this. As a young person, I wasn't around when this was all happening, and I was just a little horrified, honestly, that we had such an enormous impact on this beautiful country, and no one had ever thought to teach me about it.
We had a number of experience. I mean, I remember learning the most about this particular issue when we were at the up in the coffee plantation there. Maria, why don't you tell our viewers about that experience that we had, just in general, but also, what we learned from that coffee farmer about his involvement in that Civil War, if you can remember that.
Yeah. So when you go on the tours, you get to experience what it's like to go into the coffee farms, and pretty much what we did is we went into the farm. We saw, this man who was leading us through the farm, and he was showing us that this has been his coffee farm, and as hard as they work every day, it only really produces a couple cups of coffee, and as hard as they work, which is something extremely amazing and crazy to think about, because we just go and get Starbucks coffee pretty easily, but you never really think about how much work and effort and time that goes in to it. But as you were saying, so yeah, the man who was showing us around his coffee plantation, I believe that's what it's called, pretty much he had his own experience in the Civil War, and he was taken off of the street pretty much, because at that, I mean, as bad as this sentence is, but it's essentially fair game for the people who the military to come and just pick up young boys, at that time. Um, and I remember he was getting onto the school bus, so he wasn't technically like in a safe area. Um, Dad, correct me if I'm wrong, but they grabbed him and he was going off to go, participate and be a part of this horrible thing without his will. And I remember he had a friend who had saw him get picked up, and his friend went home to his family, and he told him, hey, your son just got taken, to go. So if you don't hear from him, that's why. And the family went to, the headquarters, and they tried to talk to somebody to get him out of it. And the only way that he was able to really get out of it was, because he was a student and that he could read and write. They let him go, and that was something that I thought was very interesting and powerful, because these people just get picked up off the street. When this was happening, they get picked up off the street, get taken away, against their will, and are told to go. And some of them never see their families again. And it was interesting to hear this man explain how he thought that he was gone for a week, maybe. It felt that long, the things that they'd gone through. And it was only about maybe 2 days maximum. And the one thing I will add on to that is that, I have friends there, that I've made, and they say that the people who were affected by the war, who were in the war, are still heavily, heavily affected by it today. They have, obviously that PTSD, and they see it, and it's something that it's very, very hidden from, the naked eye, or even from families. But again, as Maya said, like, I wasn't around during that time, but people who are living there now are and were, and even though that is part of their history, so welcoming and friendly. Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, you probably know more
Yeah.
than me about this subject. I remember it wasn't, of course, that the farmer that was sharing with us that he'd been conscripted and stuff, and wasn't he forced to shoot at some of his neighbors, or am I misremembering that? What can you fill in on this?
Well, not specifically that story of this fellow. Yeah, he was conscripted into the military, like against his will. Like, in fact, entire villages were depleted of the men in this age group who would be fighting in the military, forced to join the Republican Army. And again, this is the era, by the way, Reed, and all you guys, of the ultimate fear of communism amongst the American government. And so think early 60s, think pre-Vietnam, Cuba. And so any government that I think, was it William you were talking about, that was proposing to redistribute the lands to the locals in an equitable way, because with the United Fruit Company, it's astonishing to imagine that American companies owned 90% of the land in Guatemala, 90% at one point. And of course, they paid the local farmers, or they forced them to grow bananas, great export crops, but didn't help the locals. Thus, the name Banana Republic evolves. And the roots of poverty come from that. They're exporting from their arable land products that they can't use very well, right? Anyway, the farmer who tells us the story suffered through that. And as Maria said, one of the lessons that he says is, my children and my grandchildren are paying for this today and will pay for a long time. It was 36 years. It ended in 1996. And finally, when Bill Clinton, I can't remember what year it was, apologized for our involvement in that civil war. But a 36-year civil war has an enormous impact on an economy, right? And they're still paying for it today. Maria mentioned these guys pick coffee beans, and we do it on the tour, by the way. It's a great experience to go pick coffee beans if it's the right season. And what she was referring to is you pick for a couple of hours and you realize you've picked, and your back is sore and this kind of thing, 2 or 3 cups worth of coffee. That's it. So anyway, it's a good, that's what I like about the way we do it. And it's easy for anybody to go into Guatemala to have this kind of experience as well, where you really learn the lesson by doing things.
Yeah, backbreaking work. But what I remember is, I mean, it's all perspective, right? I mean, after the horrors of his childhood and being conscripted but being a little bit lucky, you know, and being able to get out and stuff, his particular case, I mean, he's happier than than a pig in slop. You know, he just enjoys his life. He's got this great attitude. There doesn't seem to be any bitterness. That was the lesson I took away. I mean, broke your heart to hear the story, but we keep coming back to the Guatemalan people. They just seem happy and content. It just, that's one of those beauties of travel, right? Is finding out that just having material wealth does not necessarily lead to satisfaction in life. And these people that are very, very poor seem to be at the same time very, very content. Okay, well, let's leave that subject to the Civil War. Of course, we could probably spend the whole hour talking about that, but let's talk about some of the other cultural connection experiences that we got to enjoy on the tour. I think I know one of my favorite evenings. I know William will chime in on this too. Maria actually arranged for us to have dinner in the home of the family that she lived with. So Maria, you got to give us a little bit of background. Number one, why were you there living with this family? Right? We need to know that. And then, kick us off with talking about that evening, and we'll maybe let William talk about the results of that evening. So why were you living with that family?
Yeah, excuse me. I went, so I think about 3 years now. 3 years ago, I went on a immersion trip to Guatemala with a company called Global Visionaries, which Imprint has a pretty good tie with now. And I went down and lived in Guatemala for 2 weeks, and I stayed with a homestay family. And I went to school there. I worked there. I lived there. It was an amazing experience. And this family really welcomed me in. They had a couple kids, and the bond that you form, when you have nothing to do for a good period of time. I also, a lot of people think I might speak fluent Spanish, which is not the case. I wish it were. But this family spoke just about no English, which happened to be the case that I was living with. And the bond that we formed, doesn't always have to be spoken. So we played a lot of games. I hung out with the mom. I cooked, and it was just a really good experience. Enough so that when we went down with Imprint, we had contacted that family and asked them, hey, I know it's a lot of people, but I was wondering if, we could have dinner with you so that these people could experience what it's like, one, in a home in Guatemala. And this is a very nice home, I will say. Not that many people are able to afford this or even have this. And the homestay grandfather actually built the house that we were in. And they said, absolutely, we'll have, what was it, 20 people maybe come and eat dinner with them. So we ate dinner with them. It was a great experience. There were tons of kids around. And that's one thing I love about Guatemala is every meal is family style, whether that's with the actual family or with a ton of 20 strangers that they had just met. They're all so welcoming. And it's really cool to see, even while we were there, they had neighbors coming in, getting food, or, cousins coming in. And it was just a really great experience.
And some pretty interesting things came out of that evening. William, are you willing to chime in and tell us about that? You're on mute, right? Okay, there you go. Tell us what happened that evening.
I'll see if how much I can get out. I have a 6-month-old that just woke up. Well, Maria had a couple of friends that had stopped by to visit her earlier in the day when we were at the gentleman who grew the coffee. And these two young men ended up hanging out with us. And then I believe that Steve, you invited them to go to dinner with us. right? I think that's how it all worked out, because they just wanted to say hello to Maria, that
Yeah.
who they had met when she was down there. And I got the pleasure of sitting next to these two gentlemen during dinner. Because I speak Spanish, it was a little bit easier for me to communicate with them. And I was curious about their lives and what they were doing, and they had just graduated from high school. I told you. Yeah. And so I was asking about college, the possibility of going to university. And then I started to say, well, you know what, I didn't want to come out and just ask them, you know, what they were going to, you know, about the financial aspect of it. But I did little by little find out through the course of our conversation that, and Steve, you can give me the exact number per year. We ended up talking about what room and board would be, and tuition and fees per year for one person was it 2,000 or
4,000
4,000 for 4 years
for each year,
for each
for
year.
everything, books, everything. So
And
Oh,
so, but then we were talking about these gentlemen were sharing with me that because of their economic means, that their families simply couldn't afford to send them to college, and that they would need to go out and get jobs, and that would be very tricky. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm making a phone call home and I'm telling my wife we're going to be putting some boys through college. I mean, I was just doing the math and I'm thinking it's nothing really compared to, you know, our good fortune in the United States. A woman named Jessica was sitting across from me. She got involved in the conversation, and pretty soon there was talk around the table about all of us pitching in to send these two young men through 4 years of university. And my memory is that by the end of that dinner, we had made collectively an agreement in front of these two young men to send them to 4 years of university with all tuition, room and board, and fees paid. And it was really emotional. I mean, I remember there were some tears. I was certainly very emotional about it. And these two young men are like sitting there going, what just happened?
yeah,
It was one of the most special moments in my travel life that I've ever had. Really, really incredible. You can fill in the blanks, Steve.
all right. I'd be happy. I like the way it started, where Maria invites herself and 19 of her best friends over for dinner. And they cleared out everything for us. They found chairs from all the neighbors. We're in a poor village, but this is a lucky family, so they're comparatively well off, right? They can do this, and the food was phenomenal. And we were the talk of the town, as you can imagine. And these guys, you were right, William. They're buddies of Maria's. They still communicate. Luis and Javier, I remember. And hi there. Oh man. Anyway, they just came by to say hi to Maria, and do you remember this? We just interrogated them during the coffee tasting before dinner about what their lives were like. And this is the great value of this kind of thing, traveling in a country like Guatemala, is you can get these kinds of insights because we have connections to people who can explain to you. Thank God we had William to translate. And Aurelio too. We had some others, but William's Spanish and English, his English isn't bad, but his Spanish is phenomenal. Anyway, that was something I didn't expect. I orchestrated these tours with Reed to start with, to donate any profit that we make. William donates his time, Maria does, I do, Reed, to causes in Guatemala, I should say. But this group was so generous, so remarkable, so selfless, that they were moved in certain places to really make these kinds of agreements. And I think it's actually $12,000 for all 4 years or something. My math may be off, but anyway, times 2 for these guys, and they're covered. They finished 1 year of college. Granted, with COVID, it's a little bit interrupted, but they're through their first year now. And they're the same age as Maria. So Maria's about to start her sophomore year in the fall. And they, thanks to this group, Reed and Imprint Tours, will be able to do the same.
Yeah, I mean, this is why Guatemala moved me so much. Not the way that Guatemala touched our travelers, I think, is the story to share.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Steve, you and I set this up. We agreed that the profits would go to support Global Visionaries and Safe Passage. We'll maybe get to talk about Safe Passage in a minute too. but never in our wildest dreams did we realize that the largesse and the passion and the compassion of our travelers would actually double and triple our input in terms of what we could invest in this country. We'll circle back to that, Steve, because I want you to tell people of what you set up then for the apparatus for funneling funds back in. So anyway, I mean, yeah, just to summarize, because Maria had this connection with this family, and I love the way you said it, Steve. Hey, could I come over with 21 of my new best friends? And we invaded their house, and the synergy there resulted in these two young men who, whose heads must have been spinning, are now getting a college education. Just what a fantastic story. I'm just delighted to have been a part of that. And it seemed like every day, I mean, not quite as spectacular and dramatic and with dramatic results like that. Every day on the tour, there was things like that happening. I can say this easily, of all the tours that I've done all around the world, this is the most experientially based, the most cultural connections, which is something we try to do on all our tours. But every day we were connecting with the locals in some way or another. I think back to, now I've lost it. When we visited the school in the village. Let's see, Maia, can you remember that? Can you walk us through what happened when we went up, and we'll help you if you don't remember. I'm just putting you on the spot here. Tell us about the day we visited the village and the school.
Is this where somebody wanted to buy shoes
Yeah.
for all of the school children?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
Well, that's the point I wanted to get to. Steve, why don't you tell us about that day? Because you set it up. We went up into the village. Tell us about that day and the results.
And Maria, you may want to chime in because it's her organization, Global Visionaries, that this was a visit to a rural school that was funded and built by students Maria's age group and then Maia's age group through the organization of Global Visionaries. And schools like this in rural areas are really important in Guatemala because people don't have cars and they live in the jungle. There's a great part of the country that is covered, with jungle, so they can't walk far to a school. Miles and miles to cities, etc. And we realized when we were in the village, right, Maria, do you want to pick it up from there, that these children didn't have much in the way of comfort level on their feet?
Yeah. So like my dad mentioned, it was with Global Visionaries. I did mention when I was down there, I worked, and what I was doing when I was working is I was working on building a school. And so this is one of the schools that we visit with Imprint that was built several years ago by Global Visionaries. And it's in a small village on the side of a mountain, volcano. These kids, they walk to school. It's not that far for them. It's right there. It's obvious, you can see it from where their houses are. But some of the kids who go to those schools don't have shoes. And I remember the first time that I went down there, this was several years ago, not with Imprint. We were talking to this boy, and he was telling us that he only got to go to school every other day. And we were sort of explaining, like wondering why, maybe there's something he has to be home for, it's too far, something. And he had explained that he couldn't go to school every day. He had to go every other day because they only had one pair of shoes between him and his brother, and he had to share them, which, to me and to everyone there was like, that's almost unfathomable for ourselves because, we have a couple different shoes we can pick from in the day. And then when we went with Imprint just 2 years ago, this story is obviously one that I like to tell and really put in perspective of people. And when you go there, you see it as well. It's definitely different from where, I live or any of you guys live. but these people and these children are living in, I don't know if hut is the right word, but they kind of look like huts. But it's made out of garbage and long pieces of wood that they've made themselves, and it's really something powerful and interesting to see. And I guess like Maia was saying earlier, we went and we visited this place at the same time, and one of our members was so touched by these young children, these who are walking barefoot in the hills, and wanted to purchase a pair of shoes for every one of those children who are in that village going to school who might not have them.
Yeah, I remember while we were sitting there in the new school building and just talking to one of the locals and learning that story. The kids, the little playground was right next door, and there was a handful of kids over there. And like Steve said before, wherever we went, we were the local story. Of course, 20 gringos. Is that insensitive for me to say that? White people showing up in this village, of course. So these kids were all over, and they were playing, and not a one of them had a pair of shoes on. And I think that's what touched. It was I can't pull their names out right now. One of the couples said, just on the spot, spontaneously, we're buying shoes for every kid in this village. I mean, what a great story. William, you had you had chime in before. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to say 19 gringos, speak for yourself. Yo soy mexicano, así que. No, I was just going to ask Steve, just looping back to the two college students. I know that Steve, you've received information and updates as they have completed. I was just wondering, I thought it would be cool to give everybody just an update. What has transpired since that initial, infusion of money for their education?
Well, I know, they've completed their first year of college, and one wants to be an engineer. I think it's civil, and the other wants to be an architect. And they, so far, so good. And I think the lesson, both in the small village we were just talking about, where I think his name was Bruce Reed, offered to buy the shoes and did for the village kids. The important lesson is education, because that's the lesson you learn in countries like Guatemala. So many kids don't graduate from, whether it's primary school, high school, or college, that it's hard to imagine riding the ship without a educated class, enough people who can help make these changes. And these, I feel like, William, that thanks to Maria's connection, we got two of them on their way. And I also think, the program that Maria was talking about, Global Visionaries, by the way, programs like that, they're all designed for the Mayas of the world who didn't hear a word about this. She went to a great high school. I know Ballard High, and she went to a fine college in Colorado State, and still we know nothing about this. So programs like Global Visionaries and tours that we're following up on, Reed and William, help educate us, right, as Americans, particularly the younger Americans.
Yeah. And speaking of Global Visionaries, the other charity that Imprint supports down there is Safe Passage. And we had quite an interesting experience with that. Who am I going to put on the spot to talk about Safe Passage? Let's see, I'm looking at your faces. William, I'm choosing you. Tell us about our experience with Safe Passage there in Guatemala City.
Well, when I believe we had gone to Tikal, so we flew to Tikal in the middle of the almost toward the Yucatan Peninsula, and we had spent a few days learning about the Mayan ruins, which was such a wonderful, phenomenal experience. And I talk about putting that almost a little padding on that kind of the stress that you experience when you're in an intense travel situation, and that sounds like a negative, but it's not. It's just a fact that you are, in your brand new environment, you're doing all these new things, and you're in a developing country. And then you have a moment where you can maybe put a little padding on that and go have this fun adventure. And then we take the plane back to Guatemala City, and we're in this intense, relatively gritty city.
Mhm.
And we're then transported to the Guatemala City dump, which I think a lot of Americans have heard about, this huge city dump in the middle of Guatemala City where people live, and they spend 8 to 12 hours a day going through the dump, finding things that they can extract from the dump site in order to sell on the streets or in front of their homes. And what has developed over a course of many, many years, and Steve can speak to the specific history of it, is a school that educates the children who have parents and family members working in the dump. And so we were connected to the school. One of the things that was so cool to see is that they're continuing to build and to grow. The University of Washington has been involved with the school down there, building a beautiful facility and patio and garden. And that was really special to see that the children who have parents working in this incredibly horrible location are being cared for, being educated, being taught how to care for themselves. And even I was impressed by the fact that they even have post 12th grade or post graduation programs for the women, so that they can learn to be independent and not have to rely on their life living in the dump. But Steve, I know you know so much more about it. This was, for me, I had heard about it, and to go there and to see it was shocking. It was touching. It was emotional. But at the same time, I felt really grateful for having that experience to learn about it and to be able to help in any way we could.
Yeah, Maria, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well,
Oh, Reed, sorry.
yeah, I mean, I'm like William. Yeah, I knew nothing about it before we got there. I knew that it happened in the world, right? That there are these huge dumps and people pick through them and stuff. But to see what Safe Passage has accomplished there with the school, and the women are taking plastics and things that they're finding in the garbage and crafting them into jewelry and selling them. And a bunch of our people on the tour bought those things and stuff. And then we saw the little video of this woman's life, whose vision it was that created this. She actually dies tragically at a young age, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And for a short tour, I think we all had more tears on a regular basis, just because of the way that we were being moved on a day-to-day basis. So it was, I was a little wary of putting on this, when we were trying to market the tour and trying to convince Americans to come to Guatemala with us, garbage dump visit as a tour activity. But at the end of the day, that's what we did. And I think it was as powerful an experience as we had on the tour. And I don't know, anybody else want to chime in on that morning? Go ahead, Maya.
I also was quite concerned when I saw that on the itinerary, because my first thought was, oh gosh, is this just going to be a bunch of white people, mostly, staring at people working in a garbage dump? I was concerned that it was not going to be as interactive as it turned out to be. And I was just blown away by how educational and how well done the program was, and how it wasn't just a bunch of us staring at the garbage dump. It was a lot more learning about what's going on there and how this program is helping to get people out of the dump.
Yeah.
Also, I thought it was interesting that when we got there, they're so intentional about maintaining the respect and the privacy of the people that live there. So you can look way, way, way down into the hole and see the people working there, but they ask you not to take any photographs. We actually went to the other side of almost the city, on the other side of the dump, and went to a cemetery to be able to look down deep into the hole but you almost need a huge lens to be able to see the individuals. And they ask us not to take photographs and not to record out of respect for those people.
Yeah. Hey, there have been some comments and one question on the Facebook broadcast. Israel Macario asks, "Are the chicken buses safe?" Now, I can't respond to that.
Hey, we did it.
We did it, and we did it with success.
Those are the local. I mean, I know what they mean by the chicken buses. Does anybody want to take on whether they're safe or not?
Well, I can talk as an independent traveler, because that's probably where he's coming from. Yeah, I mean, they're as safe as any public transportation without seatbelts, and American school buses that get sent to Latin and South America and then are painted bright colors, and the engines are rebuilt and used for public transit. And the music blares, and the price is almost free, you know, to go wherever you want. It's so cheap. And they pack people in with the chickens as well. That's the idea. Usually they throw them on top of the bus and lash them in, but that's where the name comes from. But I love how the drivers paint them their own bright colors. And yes, we used them on our tour. As you remember, we went from point A to point B just to have that experience. Also, it's a common way and it's a safe way to travel in Guatemala, I think.
I'd forgotten we took the chicken buses.
Yeah.
What was that, William?
No, I was going to add that you still have to be careful of pickpockets like you do in Barcelona or Madrid or Rome or Paris or Florence. We had one traveler with us who had left something hanging out of her pocket. I believe it was her phone, and got up and it was gone.
That's right.
But this is anywhere. I mean, this is just wise, these are just travel hacks that you need to guard your things when you travel. This bus wasn't any more dangerous than being on the metro in Paris.
Right. Well, actually,
I was going to say
a lot safer than the metro in Paris.
I was going to say that. Actually, I felt safer than on the metro in Paris.
I mean,
sorry, Steve.
Is we make that all the time. It's like I felt beyond safe every minute of that tour. Maybe a tiny little bit more cautious when we were in Guatemala City. I mean, and that's travel, right? When you're in the big city, you got to watch out that you're presenting opportunity for criminals, whether it's pickpockets or flim flam artists or whatever like that. But even in Guatemala City, I didn't feel physically in any sort of danger. So really a safe country.
And we only had to tell the bus driver to slow down once, right?
So we're winding down on time here. We've mentioned Tikal. That was Tikal is the big bang destination site that Guatemala boasts, and I think it's worth our talking a little bit about our impressions there. Personally, having traveled earlier in my life all over the Yucatan Peninsula and having visited several Mayan ruin sites, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, a couple other smaller ones, I find Tikal to be the most impressive. So I loved my experience there. What did you guys think of Tikal? Maia, what was your impression when we visited that Mayan site?
I was pretty impressed. I appreciated that it was sort of out in the middle of the jungle. I thought that really added to it as well. What was it that the guide said that it means? Does anyone remember that?
No, I can't remember.
I don't.
Well, I've got a note about it on my phone somewhere. Maybe someone else should talk and I'll find it, because that was what touched me the most about it, is what it means.
Okay, Maria, we'll go to you while Maia looks up the meaning of Tikal.
Well, yeah, I think, people don't really, I mean, some people could see it as, oh, these are cool ruins, but when you really learn about the history about it, and you go and you see them, it's a whole different experience that, thankfully we were able to, experience. One thing I know that I will add on is that they're Mayan ruins, which a little bit of a tie back to the history is, you know, when the war was happening, a lot of the Mayan people were taken out of the equation of the Guatemalan population. And I am Mayan. And so that is something that has always touched my heart personally. And, you know, these Mayan ruins are very powerful to see, because that is their history. And yeah, it's just a really awesome experience to go and see them.
I think it's astonishing for Americans to imagine that over 1,000 years ago, this civilization was one of the most advanced of the world. And when you go there, you really feel it. It's palpable. With all the ruins and the vastness of it, 100,000 people lived in that Tikal area. 100,000 people were supported by that that series of ruins, waterways, canals. It was just astonishing to see, and it's humbling too, because we are now American society today is the Tikal of 1,000 years ago. Are we the most advanced in the world? And then we get to see the ruins, or if you've been to Egypt or Rome, Tikal, they're all lessons that we can learn from.
I had an interesting conversation with a local gentleman there, who was doing work in his yard and found little Mayan figurines and Mayan artifacts that were buried in his yard as he was doing yard work. And then he sells them to people who stop by his little booth. And he says, oh yeah, he says, I find this stuff all the time. And I'm picking up these little artifacts and pieces of pottery and figurines. And that was mind blowing, because I saw the same sort of thing in Peru when we were in Nazca. You're walking and you see pieces of basket and you see bone and you see beads, and a lot of places in the world where you travel, those aren't things that you would encounter. So it was fun to have a conversation with him.
Okay,
Maia, did you
so
find it?
yeah, Tikal means the place of echo.
Ooh. The place of echo. And Maria, I was going to ask you, that wasn't your first time to call with us when no, you'd been there before. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, but thanks for sharing that about your Mayan heritage, though. Of course your heart would swell with pride when you see what that culture had accomplished, and those are your roots. That's great stuff. Okay, to wrap up here, I'm gonna go around the circuit and ask everybody to share their favorite moment from our 9 days in Guatemala in 2019. It can be a cultural thing, it can be a sight thing, it can be the beautiful view behind me. What you just if you can single it down to one or two of your favorite moments, and that's the way we'll wrap today. So I'm just going to go in order here. Steve, what was your favorite moment?
I think, oh gosh, boy, there's so many, but I'll go with having the mayor greet us in Segundo Cruz, which was the small village where we visited the school that was built in the jungle, and having the village entirely welcome us as they did.
Yeah, they fed us lunch and it was
great. They did. Yep, they did.
William, top moment.
In addition to the dinner conversation that I had regarding the college education, that was the top moment. Second to that was our visit to the cooperative on the lake what's the name of the village where the cooperative, Steve?
San Juan La Laguna.
Okay, so the cooperative that we visited at that location, and it's a weaving cooperative run by the women of those villages, and to spend time with a woman there who is teaching us about the weaving and the yarn and the way they dye everything. And that was really cool. And to bring home some of those items and to have those in our home, and to think about that experience that I had with all of you and our beautiful group, that was really a special moment for me.
Maria?
Well, my favorite moment, I think, was the experiencing my friends and my homestay family touch everybody on the tour. Because, I was on the other side of that a little bit, because I had lived with them and gone to school with them. And so I think that was definitely, it was nice to see that they had touched everybody on the tour just as much as they had touched me when I had first met them years before.
Maia?
I think for me, it was the coffee plantation visit because that felt like the beginning of my understanding of the history and learning more about the culture. And then just seeing how much it touched everyone else along the way.
Yeah. This is a tough one for me to answer, and I'm going to go a little bit selfish and say that the moment for me was the last moment when we all gathered together in our hotel in Guatemala City on the last night of the tour, and everybody was sharing like we are right now about their personal highlights from the tour, and there were tears, and people were just so moved. I mean, all the things that you all have mentioned and several others, always about the people, always about the connections and the inspiration that it all created in everybody, to have been a part of organizing it, as I said, from the back seat with Steve at the steering wheel, but to have been part of it was, that was my moment where my heart swelled with pride, and I just felt so good about what we had done and what had resulted, so much of it being spontaneous and beyond my expectations. That was just a great moment for me. But I could go on and on about the individual things that happened, and sitting next to the pool behind me in the picture with that spectacular view. I mean, there was just moment after moment after moment. So anyway, we'll wrap it up here. And of course, Guatemala is, when the COVID thing is all over, Guatemala will be a regular destination. You can travel there with Steve and William in the future. And we'd love to have you along if you ever want to go to Guatemala. Any last words from anybody before we say goodbye to everybody?
Maya, go first.
I just would like to add, if you're watching this and you're interested, I have just published a blog that I wrote on Guatemala, which at the end includes both of the links for Safe Passage and Global Visionaries, if you want to take a look at that. And if you're feeling socially conscious, just circling back to the United Fruit Company, they kind of never really got in trouble for that. And now they just changed their name, and now they're just called Dole. Right. So if you'd like to participate in that way, you can choose not to buy those products.
Thank you for that, Maya. Also wanted to mention that Steve Smith and I have committed to doing this trip every year, every fall, October, November, and we're hoping to go out this year, right, in 2021. If you're interested at all, please go to imprinttours.com and look at the itinerary, hit either one of us or read up for more information. We would love to have you. We don't take any grumps though, so just know that.
If I can add, Reed, before, I'm just, thank you, William, for saying that. And I'm just grateful for anybody who's paying attention to this, that you have an interest in Guatemala, and thank you for showing interest in this wonderful country. To all the viewers.
Thank you, Reed, for your commitment to support the programs and to be working with us on this tour.
Hey, it's been one of the most fun things I've got to do in my job. So thanks all of you for participating. All right, this has been great, everybody. Thank you, Maya, Maria, Steve, and William for participating in this fun coffee chat. Hey, an appropriate name for a country that produces coffee. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if you're interested in Guatemala, as William said, imprinttours.com will get you any information that you want. Okay, adios, everybody. See you next time.
Bye, ladies.
Take care of that baby.
I will. Bye-bye.